Aline Neil Jacqueline. Alina Jacqueline, I think his person is called. Apologies if I got it wrong. This is a good question I'd like to ask you, actually, Peter, as well. Is who are your illustration heroes or other artists that influence and inspire you? I know we touched on it a bit there.
Mhm. Well, I suspect that your list is very long, and mine certainly is too. But one of the ones that I come back to all the time in terms of people who've kind of driven the way that I actually draw on a way, like to an extent that I can't even resist because it goes back so far, is Stan Sakai. He
Okay.
did
Fun.
Usagi Yojimbo, the samurai rabbit
Rabbit.
um, comics, which was like I still have a copy. The first thing I ever bought with my own money was one of those comics, and I still have it, and it's pristine because I love it so much. And yeah, I just soaked that stuff up, and the way that I draw is hugely influenced by him and Franco-Belgian artists like Hergé from Tintin and
Mhm.
Uderzo who drew Asterix, and so really clean line
Lynn
comic
Clare.
artists.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's the biggest thing. And then as far as contemporary people who set an example for me professionally, I'd have to say Yuko Shimizu, who I learned. I was a student of hers in a workshop some years ago, and she's very much as far as living people, one of my heroes.
Hmm.
What about you?
Interesting. Oh gosh, I'm just looking at your shirt and the Haida inspired
Mhm.
creative art, and I'm thinking that I've discovered on my journey a lot of the art that I loved. I keep going back further, I keep finding the
Yeah, yeah,
the stuff, and I'm more and more inspired by the sort of shamanic indigenous art that you see, and at the same time, and that's very inspiring for me, and it's the kind of thing that you could imagine you might see on in a fire, in any time in history, sitting around a fire being told stories and how things are presented to you, that kind of amazing um sort of 2D representation of the dream space. And I find it fascinating to see in Native American art, in Irish art, in indigenous art all over the world, including the Haida that your shirt made me think of. So I find that fascinating. And then on the other side, I've spent the last 6 months going deep into studying, Rubens, and learning to paint, oil painting in the kind of Dutch style, and doing a lot of anatomy, life drawing classes in the École de Beaux-Arts in Paris. So I find myself constantly kind of going to either end of the spectrum. And that's why I think I love Gustav Klimt, for example, because part of one image that you would see from him will have this almost indigenous abstraction and beautiful
yep.
classical figure drawing. And that's what I like about your work as well, Peter, that it seems to fall somewhere it's able to kind of play on that spectrum, even in the same image. So I love that.
That's the big goal for me. Like that's I don't know. Alchemists used to have their holy grail of what was it, making lead into gold or something. And
Mhm.
my big thing that I will probably never manage, but I'm always trying to do is to it's like a grand unified theory of the picture plane where you can do both of those things at the same time because I want to have both, just like you.
Yeah.
Um, I love a lot of the classical Western naturalist kind of
Mm.
art, especially for figures, right? When it comes to people,
Hmm.
that's what really speaks to me. And then, as you said, all of the much older modes of drawing and picture making. I want to have my cake and eat it too. I haven't quite figured out how to
Yeah.
merge them in a way that I'm always happy with. But yeah, that's the goal, and
Yeah.
that's exactly how I feel about Klimt as well. Like exactly.
It's funny, when I was in Paris, like I would spend a day in Musée d'Orsay and be totally into that stuff, and then go to the Centre Pompidou and kind of really dig what a lot of the 20th century modernists were doing, because they were almost like cartoonists sometimes. And what I
Yeah.
loved about that was that they were, shaking things up, and but in the way, like I think I'm always drawn to the sort of the earlier stuff where they were just on the path away from figurative work and into abstraction. Once they go all the way into abstraction and conceptual, kind of loses me a bit sometimes. And
Yeah.
the stuff that you walk through the Rijksmuseum and there's room after room of kind of brown, very beautifully, skillfully painted images, but very similar subject matter. They were sort of like these portraits for, rich burgers or whatever. And, you know,
Yep.
that, you know,
Yep.
the skill is what attracts me to those. And
Sure.
the experimentation is what attracts me to the guys in the middle. And always found it fascinating that people like Picasso and so on looked back to, African tribal masks and, indigenous
Mhm.
mark making and stuff, and was trying to find a synthesis. So that continues to be I think the answer is everything. So we love
Yeah. Right.
everything. We love
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.